We muted you, Kari.
I think she's back.
Hi. Oh, did you mute me so that you didn't hear like my bathroom? It's not that close.
Right.
No, I got you.
Oh, you're right. So, okay. I am so excited about this class. I wish I could make this. I'm just going to make this stop. I have it set up on my phone as well, but I can hear it repeating. Do you hear it?
Yeah, you can hear it.
Okay, then let me make it stop. And I don't know how do I?
You can just turn the volume down on your phone. I've done that before and it cuts back on that echo.
You know what's weird is it's all the way down. And yet it's still, there, leave. Bye, Sheila.
It's Felicia.
I know it's Felicia, but okay. But Felicia's had enough pain. We're gonna pick on Sheila now. All right, guys. So welcome to the first in our 7-part series of ancient oils of Egypt. I'm so excited. Well, the series actually is ancient oils, and we're gonna move through so many wonderful topics. We're gonna get to go through Greece, through Rome, through oils of the Bible. We're gonna do India and learning all about the traditional use of oils there. We're gonna move through into Europe and sort of what brought us into more of like a modern time, or the use that we're kind of currently familiar with. And it's been so much fun putting this together for you guys. I've had a blast getting to do some research, getting to get involved with, you know, just sitting and reading. How nice is that, right? To just sit and read and get to do some good learning. I love, learner is one of my top 5s. And so this has been wonderful. I've got a ton of notes that make no sense to me now. It was funny. I was laughing at myself because I'm like, this is just like how my notes looked when I was in college, like little bullet points sticking out and arrows circling around and all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and dig in. So today we're going to talk about a few different things. We cannot get started without talking about life in ancient Egypt and what were the circumstances in which this deeper level of understanding of plants, of medicine, of science, and also why was it needed? Like, what were those circumstances that all came together to kind of create this explosion of all of this thought and all of these new discoveries, right? We're going to touch briefly on mummification. I know I felt like I honestly almost didn't even include it because it's not the most fascinating part. It's what we associate, what we hear a lot about when it comes to how Egyptians used oils or, you know, plants and oils together. But it's not the most fascinating part. The papyrus and the all of the writings, you know, the Ebers papyrus, we're going to dig into that. We're going to talk a little bit about medical practice, common medicinal plants, because I thought I could not possibly do this without addressing that, right? That were used at the time. And then the spiritual importance and how they were used through the religion of ancient Egypt. So life in ancient Egypt and the power of civilization, right? So when we talk about how and why, there were obviously other older, you know, civilizations and worlds. You know, this is just sort of the history book versions of things that we get today. However, ancient Egypt really did have a perfect storm, right? They had the fertility of the Nile. They had the Delta, which is the area up toward the top, you know, that floods out into the Mediterranean Sea. And more importantly, it was consistent. It was a very consistent yearly, you know, like they almost could time it down to what week it was going to happen, that the floods would come and repopulate all of the banks of the river with this really, really rich silt and soil that would then create for them this beautiful situation of being able to develop really deep levels of agriculture. In addition to that, they were able to build upon it. Oh, somebody's trying to get in. I'll let you do that, Susan, from here forward. But they were, when you're in one place and you develop something and then you realize, you know, if I could just put some, you know, a little bit of a board here or a little something here and reinforce this. So you were able to improve and improve and improve on what you had done in previous years, as opposed to a nomadic lifestyle or just coming upon something, right? And like wild crafting things, right? You had the ability to really go into moving into specialization. And specialization comes when people have, so specialization in this way doesn't mean like, oh, I'm going to go and, study, to be a doctor or something at this point. What we're talking about here is like maybe somebody is really, really good at growing one type of crop. Maybe they're really good at growing a subsistence crop or a cash crop. Maybe they decide that they want to get involved in trade, right? Well, when you're not every day thinking about shelter, food, and water, you have the ability to spend time focusing on how you can specialize in something else, right? How you can really start focusing on improving. And then what comes from that is the ability for trade to, become a tool where, okay, well, I'm really good at this, you're really good at that. How about hey, it's kind of like our little collaborative, right? I'm good at one thing, you're good at something else. Let's get together and carry the load together, right? And it helps everyone to move further faster. And so that's what was happening here in ancient Egypt. We were also looking at the domestication of the camel. This is huge, okay? This becomes a huge part of not just the Nile being a trade route going up and down, but you also are able to go east and west for great distances because of the availability of camels. Trade would happen, but through trade is knowledge. When people interact to trade, they often, it's not like, hey, here you go, necessarily like in a market. They would gather in areas and be together for weeks on end. And then in that process, ideas are exchanged, right? Knowledge is exchanged. Somebody says, oh, well, I have this thing. Oh, it's just like we are with our oils, right? What is that you're putting on for your headache? Oh, well, I got this and da, 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 right? And it allows us to be able to, or allow them to be able to exchange ideas. And that really creates even more excitement in the area. That really drives advancement in the area. The importance of health. And so, well, we have here the expansion of social structure and trade, which I already touched on, but the importance of health, when you have people who start to then move into what we would consider to be like a city setting, right? Where people are no longer just nomadically living in small tribes groups or family groups, but actually living in areas where they're interacting with each other on a regular basis, health becomes an issue because of the spread, the natural spread of viruses, bacteria, disease, and things of that nature. That specialization that we spoke about earlier also allowed for the advancement in medicine because first off, it was needed, right? We had situations where people really needed to be supported through medicine, but we also had the ability for some people who maybe had the capacity and the ability to move forward and take that knowledge to the next level. They could have that freedom because they were able to trade that skill for the things that they needed to feed and take care of their families, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about medicine and how it worked and how would somebody get started in that field, so on and so forth. The biggest thing is the development of writing. When you are able to record knowledge, right, you're then able to build upon it and have somebody else take that knowledge. Maybe you didn't get to sit with this person and have a conversation. Maybe they read what you wrote and they were able to then take that information and build upon it the same way we do today. It's just how advancement works. It's like how there's an explosion of technology once we ended up with the internet, right? There's an explosion of advancement when we bring in writing and schools for scribes and people who can come together and share information and knowledge and are able to bring in external influences into their culture, right? So the Nile River, which they just called the river, was a wealth of circumstances that were all coming together. Now, I say at the same time, this is over hundreds and hundreds of years, right? But all coming together in this area and sets up a perfect scenario for heavy advancement in social structure, heavy advancement in what we would call like civilization or government or structure in that way, where there's somebody looking out for the greater good of the community. And then as well as religion, more of an agreed upon religion and religious base where there are a larger group of people, as well as advancements, right? We get all of these wonderful advancements through the ability to focus on more than just getting through the day, getting through this year, getting through this time, right? So scent in the Egyptian culture was incredibly important. And it wasn't just for the reasons that we would like to think and that people didn't want to stink, right? It really wasn't about that. Scented oils have been used for a very, very long time in order to, there was actually a tool used for cleaning, right? Even when we get to the chapters on Rome, right? Or I should say chapters, but the workshops on Rome, you know, a common way to clean yourself would be to bathe yourself in oils. And then they have this really cool scraping tool that you would use to just scrape down your body, and it would pull all the dead skin cells and the icky gunk and dirt off of you, and there you would be all lovely and clean, right? So this is even way before that. Oils were used as a way to cleanse the body. Some of the most common scents that they used were thyme, lavender, peppermint, cedar, which there's a lot of variation in the definition of cedar. There's some argument that that is actually a form of juniper that was being used at the time. Rose, almond oil, and aloes. Now, here's the thing that I found really interesting. It wasn't just the wealthy people who had access to these oils. Everyone had access to these oils. In fact, for a lot of people who would be considered the lower class or even slave class, which of course wouldn't necessarily be paid, but they would have access to oils. But lower class citizens were often paid in oils as a form of money, as a way to say, here you go, because it had great value for everyone, right? Now, scent was more than just about having a clean body. Scent was actually the connection with the gods. If you smelt poorly, in meaning that you smelt bad, not poor as in, you know, your wealth level, it meant that you were impure and that you had lost a connection with the spiritual world. You've allowed yourself to fall outside of that connection with the spiritual world, and therefore you would have social repercussions from that, okay? It is thought that to smell good meant that you had a connection with the sacred world, and you were closer to the gods, and it was critically important for you to smell good to be welcomed into the afterlife. If you did not smell good when you died, there was going to be problems, okay? And I know it sounds, but it's really true. And here's why. In scent and incense, and I mean, even when you get into Greek mythology, the scent of cooking meat, right? Scent has always had a connection to the gods. It is something that has been used as a way to, you know, appease the gods, to make a connection with the gods. We still use scent today in worship and in our churches and in all of the different ways in which people, you know, celebrate their religion, right? It is a critical part, and it often is looked at as an offering, but a gateway. And it's interesting because there is this sense that the gods were able to smell, you know, the same sense that we as humans could smell, right? And so there was this connection in that way. And so really, really fascinating. After things developed for a while, what was determined was that maybe we need to have some things that just the priests have, because these are sacred scents, okay? These were considered the god oils or the god medicines. The god medicines were managed by the temple priests. These were the people who were able to, at some point, something had happened. Some king had like an eye infection and they cured it. And then that became a god oil. And it was thought that that oil was actually instructed, the giving of that oil, the recipe of that oil was actually given by Ra, the sun god. And so it was like, it just meant so much. And those temple priests, the belief process here was that the reason why they had that knowledge, the reason why they were able to put together that recipe was that they were channeling, you know what I mean, that Ra was speaking through them. And that's how. So those recipes would be heavily protected and only used for pharaohs, kings, and, you know, of course, variations would trickle down, like, you know, it's kind of like essential oils, like you've got doTERRA, then you've got the gas station ones, right? So it's kind of similar in that, you know, somebody's going to try to knock it off. Oh yeah, I got that recipe. No, not really. I loved this. You know, there are a lot of deities, a lot of gods in ancient Egyptian culture, and every single one of them has a signature fragrance. It is a blend that is very specific to them. And it is with that oil as one, that is one of the offerings that you would bring to the god, to the statue of the god, okay? And you would utilize that to put on the feet, to put on the head of the statue as an offering to them, okay? When I say oil, what I'm talking about, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, it's not necessarily what we're looking at when we open our bottles of oil today. All right, there are totally different processes in which they would extract oil from the plants, or extract essence, if you will, from the plants. And we will get into that. So when I use the term oil, remove from your mind this little bottle, okay? Think in your mind more along the lines of, if you were going to take a plant and, you know, crush it and put it in oil, and that typical oil pooling type of extraction, things of that nature. But you're still getting oil, right? You're still getting the plant's natural oils in there. It's just not the processing that we do today. So obviously we know that the Egyptian culture is known for cosmetics and ointments, right? I mean, it's kind of one of those things that pops up all the time, all of the amazing face painting and makeup. Bullet point. If you see that in the presentation, that is one. Did you guys lose me for a second there? Sorry. If you see that little eye down here on my presentation, that is one of the things that I will have additional information on the website about when you're going to go, and that'll be unfolding over the next week, right? So when you go to the website, you're going to find some more information about Cleopatra and her whole beauty regimens and all of these things that they're actually really fascinating, and some are comical, but nonetheless. So they were known for cosmetics and ointments. She and other kings and queens would, you know, order the development of specialized ointments and balms. This was something that was considered to be incredibly important. Again, the more filled with perfume and beauty, the closer to the gods, okay? The perfumes themselves were, you know, the oils. I mean, these are natural. These aren't store-bought things like we have today. So you're gonna have heavily scented people, and the higher up you go in royalty, the higher up you go in the dynasties and all of this, you're going to have serious levels of oil usage or plant scent uses, whatever way you want to say it. She actually created salt scrubs and used salt scrubs all the time. She also was someone, and the ancient Egyptians utilized royal jelly. If you're not familiar with royal jelly is like from bees, right? This is not an easily found situation to come by, right? But the powers are amazing. What was happening is that people recognize the value of nature. They recognize the value of these plants as really, really important. The pharaohs, the kings would have elaborate gardens, right? The temples would have elaborate gardens, and the gardens housed within them these plants from all over the world. Okay, when an offering was made or somebody came to visit, and it was that, they would bring a plant from their world, because that was the biggest level of wealth. To have the power of a plant was viewed to have the greatest power, right? Similar to, like, if you're going to bring frankincense and myrrh to Jesus, right? You're bringing the gifts that had so much meaning, because what did those things have the power to do and unlock, right? Very similar scenario. So they would fill their gardens with these things. with all of these plants actually, of all different varietals. And there were specialists who would tend to them and keep them going and then utilize them. Then the temple priests would go and actually turn them into the medicinals that they were using. They had a really strong understanding and respect for plants as being, you know, divine and powerful and able to be utilized in medicine, in culture, and in spiritual use, which I thought was just beautiful and amazing. It made me look at my garden, which I used to have and I don't have anymore, in a totally different way, in that when you, now as all of us who get involved with essential oils, we really do start to develop a different level of respect for the plants, right? We begin to develop a different respect for their capabilities and what they have the power to do and lend to our lives. And we give them as gifts, right? I mean, this is how we live. I love that the Egyptians, they were already on to that. They already knew that this was really, really highly important and an incredible, of high level of importance in their culture. Okay. People would have little tiny versions of these gardens, you know, in the more wealthy, the bigger your garden. I love that. The wealthier, the bigger your garden. So, all right. So now we're going to touch on some mummification, which is totally fascinating, right? I really, really enjoy learning, but it's really hard to pinpoint. The science is challenging because mummification is not something that was perfected immediately. It's hundreds of years of this process, right? The thing that the Egyptians wanted to do, if you're curious as to why they created mummies or why they went through this process of mummification, is that they believed that the person who had passed would need their body in the afterlife, and that they would need to have something to live in the afterlife. And they would need to eat and drink and sleep and do the things that they needed in the afterlife. And the more perfect the body, the greater the value or the greater the quality of the afterlife. Okay. What they found was that there was a great deal of like natural mummification that happened in their dry desert environment when something was buried. So if you're a fossils person, then you understand this, but if something was buried quickly at a shallow level in very, very, very dry soil, right? So what you had there was like a desiccation, right? Everything was being pulled away, and it would actually kind of naturally mummify, right? Naturally preserve the body. And so they tried to replicate that. And it took a while for them to realize that what was happening was that it wasn't that the body just had to be dry. They thought that the rotting, if you will, of the body, the decomposition of the body was happening from the outside in. They figured out after a while, because they would try to recreate that scenario, that the decomposition was happening from the inside out. And they figured out that what you had to do was actually remove the organs, right? You had to, in their mind, it was like basically it needed to be a cavity, because all of the bacteria and the bad things, of course, they weren't calling it bacteria, all of the things that were causing this problem were coming from the inside and working their way outward. And so they began that science and the study of figuring out what they had to do here. So the first things were, of course, the removal of the organs. And again, I can't say this enough. This is over hundreds of years, okay? Like older than our country. This took, you know what I mean, to give you just a sense. Now the organs would be saved. They were removed and saved because, of course, you know, you're going to need those, but you're not going to be able to take them the way that you need. You're going to have to pack them a little differently when you go from this life into the afterlife, right? First, they did not save the brain, which is fascinating, because the belief was that the heart is what carried all of the energy of the body. They did put it into something called a natron, which is actually a very heavy salt content soil that was found on the banks of the Nile River for 40 days. It would be completely buried in that. Okay. This is after the removal of the organs, a little bit of a bath with some wine and some herbs. Put it in that. This really just dried it out like nobody's business. This is salt curing the body. Okay. Like, let's be real. Once they had done that, they would remove all that, and the skin would be hard and dark brown. You've probably seen that even in some pictures, right, of mummies. And so what they would do then is they would treat it with some ox fat, ointments, and what was recorded as being cedar oil. So again, there's a little bit of confusion as to whether that was cedar, meaning the way we know cedar, or cedar, which is actually a juniper of the area, okay? Then they would fill the body cavity with cinnamon, spices, and herbs so that it would smell good. But also, you know what this did, which was, I thought, fascinating, is it actually plumps up the body. It kind of brings back the shape that you needed to be like a person, right? As opposed to skin on a skeleton. And so it filled out the body cavity, and it filled it with very, very strong aromatics. However, over time, what they realized was that these aromatics that they, you know, thought, of course, remember, in order to get into the afterlife, you have to smell really good, right? Not only were these aromatics incredibly important for that, but certain ones seem to really help people preserve for even longer, all right? You needed to be preserved for 3,000 years. That was the magic number. 3,000 years was the magic number, because that was considered the duration of the afterlife, right? So they began to figure out that, like, you know, cinnamon, cassia, myrrh, frankincense, you know, different things actually seem to preserve better than other things. Then they would wrap the body, you know, we're all familiar with mummies, right? And then they would put a very thick resin of myrrh, cassia, and camphor. I will tell you that there is argument also as to the cassia and cinnamon as being almost interchangeable in a lot of versions of the recordings, right? So you're getting, you know, Herodotus, and you're getting all of these different people who are recording, and maybe they're more familiar with one. It smells this certain way, it looks this certain, you know what I mean? So they're calling it in their layman's way. So a little bit of confusion there. Although cassia was very readily available in the area, so it's possible that that's what it is. So you can see that over time, the process of mummification brought together both the faith, the importance of the culture. This is everyone had access to this. There was a very long period of time. Even when I was in college, it was taught that the poor were not necessarily allowed to have this process happen, right? But now they have found, in more recent years, that this was actually very common for a high level of mummification to be able to take place in all different levels. Now, not necessarily the organs removed as well, and of course your caponic, your jars are not going to be as beautiful, and you're not going to, you know what I mean, but a full version of the mummification does in fact happen at all different class levels in ancient Egypt. So now we get into the fun stuff. So the papyrus, right, and all of this wonderful evidence of medicinal use of plants throughout ancient Egypt. We have the Edwin Smith papyrus, which is all about surgical, like there's a whole thing on like neurosurgery, you know, like how they were doing operations on the brain, how they were able to do full body operations. I mean, it wasn't often, obviously, but they had really spent, I mean, you know, all that mummification, right? They're learning all about what's happening in the inside of the body, but they were able to really unlock a lot. And more importantly, most importantly, they were able to record it, right? There was a really good recording process for all of the advancements, all of the information, all of the ideas. Then we have the Ebers papyrus, which is the one that we're going to spend a lot of time on, because I feel like this is the one that really is the big kahuna, right? But also the one that speaks most to what we use our oils for in the everyday. These are common health concerns, right? You've got, I don't know, what, do you guys hear all that traffic outside of me right now? Okay, good. You've got digestive system. You guys, you're going to see so much. These poor people really suffered from some digestive health issues, right? Issues of the head, the skin, you know, different little areas that we use our oils for today. And what's beautiful is that they're actually the recipes, right? The recipes for the remedies and what they did and how they put it together. The Kahun, which I love, the gynecological papyrus, was for women's health, I know, and related to pregnancy, fertility, and childbirth. I love, there's a story of, what, I'm not going to remember the two plants, but one was barley and the other one, I'm not going to remember, but the way that you found out whether or not you were pregnant was that you planted these 2 seeds in the ground, and every day you urinated on the plants, on the seeds in the earth. And if the barley grew, it was a boy, and if the other one grew, it was a girl, and if neither one grew, you weren't pregnant. And so that's how you knew. But they had at least an understanding that the acid levels, like there was going to be a change in your urine, right? So there was a little bit, you know, I mean, it's you know, we can laugh, but there is a little bit of something there, right? And it's kind of cool. You'll notice too that the names of these don't sound very Egyptian. And that is because they're named after the people who bought them or discovered them, which is kind of, I don't know, kind of a bummer, I think. But the Ebers papyrus is from a guy in Germany. He actually purchased it. It is not the original because they were constantly being, you know, copied by the scribes. And so it's actually, the information is actually way older. It's just the Ebers is actually really beautifully preserved. Okay. So let's take a little bit of a look further into this guy. 1550 BC is the dating of the Ebers, but it is way older than that. All right. It is beautiful. It has illustrations. It is filled with beautiful script. I think it's just amazing that, you know, you could have this. I mean, this is old. So 110 pages, 65 feet long, and is the largest record of medical practices of its time. 700 different remedies, recipes, and incantations, because incantations were a part of the toolbox, right? So to be able to speak to the god or goddess of whatever it is that the health issue is that the person is having, and to kind of, or ward off a demon, because it was also considered to be the act of a demon, certain illnesses. That was a really important part. So in this book, not only are you going to have the recipes and the remedies and sort of the prescriptions, but you're going to have what you're supposed to say, right? And which god or goddess you're supposed to say it to. And then you have the writing, and the writing is a form of cursive. And what's beautiful here is this helps us with our dating. So this writing was from as old as the 3rd millennium BC, all the way up through the first half of the 1st millennium BC, where the Demotic style is what comes into play. So this really is very helpful in helping with the dating. And so, and it's interesting because then you have people who are amazing people who study this and know exactly how to decipher it and read it and learn all about it. So I think the writing part of it is really fascinating. So let's take a look a little bit more into some, just barely touching on what is involved in this document. I got to move you guys because you're in my way. So it is an example of empiricism. So if you're not familiar with like empirical evidence, right? What this means is that how they made their observations or how they made their determinations about whether something worked or whether or not it didn't work was based on observation and experimentation, and that it did, for them at least, and later there's changes and that evolves, you know, over time with data and such. It did involve direct evidence of the senses, all right? And meaning that you either saw it, you know, where the information came from, it either had to be seen, heard, smelt, touched, you know what I mean, had to be directly related. And so they made these decisions about what worked and what didn't work based on what they were actually seeing happening. And I love that, because sometimes I got to tell you, I will grab an oil and I don't know why I grabbed that oil and I don't know why it works, but it worked. And I'm like, well, there you go. And sometimes I'll just kind of go and be okay with that, right? They really kind of were doing it that way. They made tremendous amount of notes. They collected a wonderful amount of information, but it's really a fascinating style of how they determine whether or not something is indeed going to work or is not going to work. Within this document, you'll also have the treatise of the heart. So they had, it's an interesting thing, a really good understanding of the heart, in that they understood that there were vessels and that the vessels went to all the different members of the body, that it actually, you know, is what helped the entire body to get blood to it. On the other side, they also thought it's what made urine and what made, you know, tears and everything. Any type of fluid in the body had to move through the heart. And they also felt that it was what we consider today to be the brain or the mind of the body, right? Everything came from the heart. The heart was the center of the body. The heart was the center of everything of life. The life force of the body was the heart. And so, but they have beautiful drawings of everything and how it all is supposed to work and how these things are connected, right? Really, really cool. Another wonderful advancement, I would consider it, I'm going to move you guys, is the Book of Hearts. And this is all about the connection between the mental health of an individual and their physical health. And they viewed the two things as combined. And we work with that all the time, obviously, but things like depression were considered a physical disability, not, you know, in this other zone, right? Dementia was a physical issue to be dealt with, not some other separate thing, right? And so what that meant was they were able to really look at the connection between what we would now call the mind and the body. They would have called it the heart and the body, and how if you deal with one issue, it connects to another issue. And we talk about that all the time, right? In what we do and how we talk about the importance of like gut health on mental health and so on and so forth. It's just really cool. Health was a struggle. This is what they considered it to be, between demons and man. So if you think about this, it makes sense. They viewed if a household came down with an ailment, that household was being attacked by a demon, or a god or goddess was unhappy. A deity was unhappy with that household. They knew how to focus on how to help them to move through it. They knew how to focus on what to do in their way to, you know, support that health issue, but they didn't know where it was coming from, right? They didn't know the source of the health issue. And so it certainly made sense, especially if you spend some time learning more about the deities of the time and how they played a role in the life of man, that they would be what was fiddling around with the health and the well-being of different people, right? They just, you know, it's just fascinating. The other thing that is happening in this papyrus is the constant reference to plants. The most common are coriander, cumin, opium, cannabis, myrrh, frankincense, fennel, cassia, senna, and henna, thyme, juniper, aloe, linseed, and castor oils. A doctor or a physician, if you will, would typically always have on them some frankincense. Frankincense was actually very readily available at the time. And so they were able to access that as a tool to use often, right? Okay, so let's move on. By the way, guys, if you have questions, just holler. All right, did I have a little thing back there too? No, I didn't. Okay. So let's look a little bit more into the life of a physician, or just kind of how that worked, because I didn't want to not include this in here. A diagnosis. So treatments were based on extensive examination with incredibly detailed notes. In fact, the notes of the examination were often far longer, far more detailed than what would be the recommended treatment, right? They were really fascinated about learning about what and how things were happening on the person in all aspects, asking about everything that was happening in their life, right? And documenting that, because of course they're learning as they're going, right? They're learning, and they're trying to fish out every, you know, detail, because that might change what's going to happen in what plants or what prescription they choose, or what treatment they choose to use. They did have medical dosing. They had prescriptions that were varied and really interesting. They would have a whole bunch of different prescriptions for the same ailment. However, they were by different physicians, and they were for different slight changes, slight differences in what would have been the person's situation. They also changed based on the time of day, week, month, or year. So there were medicines that were to be used in fall for eye health issues. They were not the same medicines that you would use in the winter or in the spring for eye health issues. So they were very detailed on everything that they had going on. They had rapid acting and slow acting remedies, and they paid very close attention to developmental stages and ages of their patients, including things like noting whether someone could swallow yet, or if it needed to be in like the wet nurse's milk, you know, whether or not someone had mobility issues that would allow them to take something or do something if that was part of the prescription, you know, for the treatment. So really, really cool. If we look into the ways that they used the plants, right? And this is one that's going to have additional information for you guys. There were three main ways, kind of similar. We have three main ways that you can use your oils, right? Or that we get our oils. The first was to boil and inhale the fumes. So you will see some documentation that refers to this as steam distillation. It's not the same thing, okay? It's just people who don't necessarily understand steam distillation that are viewing it as the breathing in of steam being that, right? What this is literally throwing the plant matter into the water, boiling it, and standing over or draping over it and breathing in the vapor, right? You could also macerate, crush the plant, right? This was really good with barks and things of that, and harder, drier, coarser plants that had a real high fibrous content. So to crush the plant and put it into an oil. And that oil actually would basically do like an oil pooling, and it would kind of infuse. So if you hear of like garlic infused oil, things of that nature today, this is what we're talking about here. And then the last one is really fascinating, enfleurage. I'm going to go with that pronunciation. And this is where you're going to use animal fats. And this is really cool. It's like laid out on a flat table where you spread the animal fats and then you push into it the plant matter, right? And then you layer again the animal fat, and you just keep doing that until you reach the desired level of, you know, how strong it is, right? And so it's really, really cool. And then that can then be utilized in so many different ways, right? As a balm, it can be used in just a plethora of different ways, right? And I thought that one was the most fascinating in that it speaks to the use of other materials, because the animal fat would also be specific to a certain animal as well. So depending on the treatment, there would be a different type of animal fat that you would want to use in order to infuse that plant into it. They would also use different minerals in conjunction with the use of their plants. And again, like I said, different animal, even body parts, right? Different parts. Let me take a look at the chat here. Romelia's saying, yeah, like a salve, exactly. Healing through scent and touch, beautiful. It was very, very common. The Egyptians had, while they had a limited understanding of exactly what was happening in that the olfactory, you know what I mean, the way that we go into aromatic use, they absolutely understand the aromatic benefits of plants and plant fragrances and plant oils. All right. They tied it with their physical as well as their spiritual health. It came together in all aspects of life, as we spoke about earlier, even just common day to day, but really, really important. It was viewed, it was just part of, I wish I could think of an example of us today, but something that was just such a normal part of life was having and utilizing all of the scent to be a part of every day. Different incense was burned in the morning versus the afternoon versus the evening. Different incenses and different oils and different salves and extracts and ointments were used on the body, on different parts of the body throughout the day. It was really just a part of the daily life. And then a beautiful thing is that the physicians it was very common that the power of massage and touch were a part of the treatment and care. So they had that understanding. And of course, in this process, oils would be used, all right? Oils or, whatever you want to say, but that infused power of the plants would then be used in that as well. So really cool stuff. Okay, so here, I put this up so you can screenshot it. There's two, by the way, if you are interested, and you're going to notice a lot of flatulence seemed to be a real problem for the Egyptian people. And they had a lot of ways to deal with it, right? But here's the thing, maybe you have access to something. This is maybe it's in a different region. I mean, this is a very large region of the world. And so some things might be more readily available than others. I love seeing, cardamom on there for digestive health, because heck yeah, man, that's how I use it all the time, right? Seeing dill on there is always a good time. And then the next one, here we have frankincense for throat and larynx infection, stops bleeding, cuts, phlegm, asthma, and stops vomiting, right? So Now they had 3 different types of frankincense. They had a white frankincense, a gray frankincense, and a black frankincense. The black frankincense was the most rare, right? This is going to be the one that was used in the temples. This would be the one that was used, you know, in death. The white frankincense was used in the mornings, right? It was a very common thing. White frankincense in the morning and myrrh at night. This was how you started your day and how you ended your day every day, which is really lovely. Over here, I love that they call out myrrh for gum health, toothaches. You know, it's fun to see the things that we still use them for today, right? We got turmeric on here for closing open wounds. Haven't tried that. I'll give it a whirl. Mint for upset stomach. You know, it's just neat. And these things are in this document, okay, as the tools. And these are part of those remedies for these different health issues. It's fascinating to see how much we still do exactly the same today and how much we don't, right? It's also important to know these are, of course, going to be varietal differences in the plants, right? Most of these plants will be from the area, but a lot of them are brought in through trade. You know, having the ability to get plant material from far off lands and expand what you know really does expand your toolbox in very much the same way that we get our oils from far off lands, and it very much expands our toolbox of what we have and what we're able to use. It's just a lot easier for us, right? But it's really cool, and there are some great explanations, and we'll have this in the additional content, some just great explanations of, well, this plant came from here and it was brought for this reason, and then it was, you know, utilized in you know, Lower Egypt or Upper Egypt for different things. So it's really, really a cool I don't know, I guess you have to be somebody who's into that, but I really find it, the trade and the connections and the culture that comes with the things that are traded. In other words, the cultural use of a plant in one place and then how that's adopted into the culture of the next place is just fascinating, right? So let's talk a little bit here about just some cool stuff that that for me really captured my interest. So kapat, which is actually the real word for incense in ancient Egypt, is actually the oldest word for incense. It's kaifi by Plutarch actually called it kaifi, which is the Greek word for the same thing. And this is what was considered the Egyptians' favorite perfume, in that it was very commonly used for many different things. Most famously, it was used to close the temples at night. This would be what was burned at night or used at night in order to bless the evening and bless the night. So I like Plutarch says it's a tranquilizer, which lulled one to sleep, allaying anxieties and brightening dreams, right? It contained 23 different ingredients. Now, there are different versions of these recipes, obviously, because again, very large area, very long history. Initially, actually, it used to be a very bitter, much more balsamic, you know, in that it had the conifer trees, all of those, that balsam, you know, all of that heavy tree scent. And later, as time went on and we moved through history, it became a much more floral. That's where you bring in the raisins and sweetness, right? Sweet raisins and things were introduced and brought in. So it did evolve through the history of time and how it was used. But at the same time, the way it was used was the same. All right, it was used in the evenings as the number one use for that. And again, and this did go and travel, as we'll find out in further workshops. This actual recipe, or this, you know, I don't know, if you think about different incense or different perfumes or different things and how they're blended, right? It might change over time a little bit, but it's still kind of the same thing, right? This same thing was then used by the Greeks as well as the Romans. It was a very famous blend that was utilized. And this, yes, this will be having additional information. Hence the little tiny guy up here. Okay. This is my favorite, the 7 sacred oils. So the 7 sacred oils are really fascinating in that they were used in a couple different ways. They were used as an offering to the gods, as well as a way to bless the deceased during the opening of the mouth ceremony. The opening of the mouth ceremony was something that happened during the mummification process, where it was believed that in order for the person to be able to eat and drink and see in the afterlife, the eyes had to be opened. But of course, this wasn't possible on the body. So there would be a statue that was a representation of the person who had passed. And the way in which someone would open the eyes and the mouth were to utilize the 7 sacred oils. Now, this wonderful stone that you see here actually has the names of the 7 oils, and it has a little tiny area where the oils would be held. And what this is, and these were actually relatively commonly found throughout Egypt, and they kind of evolve and change, of course, over time. And the point is that there is and I have this information for you as well. There is a prayer that is said, and every part of the prayer has a different oil that you would then dip your fingers in the oil and place them on the statue, right? Now, this would also be done in the home, or a pharaoh or king would utilize this and do this over a shrine. So this was also part of an offering of prayer, right, to the gods. And so 2 different times that you would use it: in the home to the gods, or in a temple, as well as, for the deceased. Now, you'll see over to the right, these are the 7 oils. What are the recipes? Yeah, good luck. But that being said, there's a lot of wonderful research and information out there that you can at least get to the general sense of whether or not something was heavy with this one particular type of plant, or if it was a sweet plant or a heart, a bitter, whatever it was. What I love is, do you see the little symbols of the little vessels, right, that are over next to each one? Those are very specific. So when you see in the drawings on the walls inside of a temple, people carrying various, vessels for oils and stuff, you can actually read those and determine what oil it was that they had. Maybe it was the oil of jubilation, in which case it's going to be exactly that particular vessel, right? If it is the oil of rejoining, it's going to be that particular vessel. And so you develop the ability and eye to understand and pick apart and tell the story of what was happening, by what the person is carrying. Okay. Typically they would be kind of seen in a train, if you will, right? Like of different people carrying the different oils, the different sacred oils, but still really, really fascinating. I found a beautiful resource about what is in each of these, at least through a lot of research this gal put together. And I'll have that link available for you guys, but it's really, really interesting to see the different ways that these were used. Myrrh is very popular, of course, in most of them as a key component. And I think, Susan, am I right? Weren't we talking in the anointing class about myrrh was actually like readily available, but cinnamon was the one that was hard to come by, right? Yeah,
exactly.
So it's interesting because like you hear about all these ways that people are using myrrh, and I'm over here thinking, man, must be nice. But at the time, myrrh and actually frankincense grew readily all over the area, and it was something that was just a constant resource for them, and they were able to use it. The hieroglyphs that you see the little guys here that's actually the name of each of the oils. And so you see this nice little, I think those are the coolest things ever. Okay, so lastly, I wanted to leave you with some information about Nefertum. So this is the god of aromatherapy and healing. I found him to be absolutely amazing and fascinating for obvious reasons. He actually evolves over time because, there's this time where Atum then, absorbs Ra and becomes Atum Ra, and all of this stuff happens and things change and yada, yada. But he is actually to have been born from a blue lotus. He rose out of the waters of Nun, and he is the healer, right? He actually brings the fragrance and aromatherapy and the sunlight, right? He brings the morning sun, he brings the sunrise every day. So he is thought to be the sun again in his early versions of Atum. And so Atum is the god of the sun, and Nefertum is the god of the sunrise. And it was thought that throughout the day, he would rise in the morning. And then throughout the day, he would basically age almost, right, into Atum as the height of the sun in the day, and then go to sleep at night. He's also said to be the reason for humans because his lonely tears in the night, each tear created the humans that live on the earth. He's just a really fascinating guy, right? But then later on, when we get to the time of the later times, right, when he becomes the son of Ta, because there is a change over to who is sort of the principal god, at that point, he is then recognized as the god of healing through flowers, right? So not only is he early on the god of, you know, perfume and aromatherapy, but later on recognized as more of a healer through the power of flowers. So I thought that was awesome. And I thought, I got to share that with everybody because it's really, really cool, right? So that it kind of wraps up just a touching on, because let me tell you guys, we could go forever and ever into way more information about how the oils are used in each one of these slides. Hence the reason why there's additional information available on each of these slides for the most part on the website. But I would love it if anybody had questions, or we could, you know, have a quick chat on anything that you're curious about. This Egyptology, to say it's a vast topic is a gross understatement. You know, people literally spend entire lifetimes. However, when you start really looking at the plants and how they were used, you can find some wonderful information. When people say that they know something is the recipe of something, be a little skeptical in that this is really old. Plants name changes, you know, things change. What we know today is to be one thing, it might not be that thing. However, it doesn't mean that we can't have a heavy respect for the way that the plants were used and how we are using them today, right? And that connection between how we use them today. So any questions or thoughts or anything on anything? Let me see here. I think I had one more. Yeah, just that these are the types of things that are going to be on the website. I am going to do diffuser blends of the gods because I'm searching for those fragrances of the different deities, you know what I mean? Because I think that's fun. And as well as there is a blend. The French said that there was a scent for every culture, for every civilization had a scent, and it was based on the plants that natively grew in the area, right? And so I do have this recipe for what would be considered the scent of ancient Egypt based on the plants that grew during that. Nerd out on your Egyptology. So
I absolutely love the seven sacred oils, that stone. That is such a beautiful stone. I love that stone. And I just love the story of that Nefertum guy, born from a blue lotus flower. Gosh, it makes me want to pull out my little blue lotus roller ball. I just love that story. It's a beautiful story.
How cool that we have blue lotus, right? That we actually
Right?
blue lotus, yeah. So you know, you see a lot of times Ra is depicted with a blue lotus being held like to his nose. I don't know if you're familiar. Like it's kind of a really common carving that you see.
Yes, and I had never, well, I had never put the two together at all.
That blue lotus represents Nefertum, and that is him offering the healing of plants to Ra. And that isn't that cool? And you see it all the time. It just, you know, and then it's neat to learn those things, right? Really, really cool. So this was fun, but let me tell you, I think we could do seven weeks on just Egypt. So it was very hard to pick what to share. I am sorry if it's a little disjointed in that way, because man, it's deep.
But yeah, people spend their lives just studying this particular culture. I mean, they make it their life, you know?
Yeah, I think you could probably do an entire series just on Cleopatra's stuff.
Right?
That's fascinating.
Yeah. You know, one thing I forgot to mention, I said I would mention it, and I just realized I forgot, was in how people became doctors or physicians, as it were. You had to first become a scribe, and because you had to be able to read and write in many different ways. And I thought that was really cool because it's obvious, right? And it was also kept within families. So it was very hard or very rare for someone who was from outside of what was considered a scribe or a physician's family to become a physician. Women were physicians, and they were trained, but only by women. Men did not, bother themselves with the training of women. And they also were not trained by women. However, really cool that there were women physicians in ancient Egypt, and really cool. I liked that they understood the importance of writing and how much documentation mattered and how much documentation would play a role in the furthering of the science, right? I think that's, especially at such an early time when writing wasn't necessary. I mean, it was very rare for people to have that skill. Really, really cool. Anywho, I'm excited to share more with you. I wish I had more time, but I've gone over time, as it were. But barely. Look, I'm not that bad.
It's not bad. I want to toss in, just because you did mention, right, that they were using enfleurage. So if you're interested in enfleurage and learning about it, check out the amazing company here, friends of mine in Albuquerque, Dryland Wilds. They do enfleurage for their oils and perfumes. They have amazing products, and they forage and use desert plants, and they do enfleurage all the time, and they'll do videos of it. And I think sometimes they do occasionally classes. So they actually will do perfumery classes where you can go and do like a workshop with them and create your own perfume. But they did, and they're actually bringing it back. They do limited release perfumes every once in a while. And last year they did the scent of New Mexico in the fall, and they're bringing it back because it was so popular. And they actually did an enfleurage of roasted green chili.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
yeah.
There you go. Right.
And they did it like with a glass cloche, and they coated the inside of it with the fat and then set it over the smoldering roasting chili. Yeah, it was amazing. It's an amazing perfume.
That is so fun. Yeah, it's interesting, and to see how the different animals, because it makes sense, some have a much thicker fat, some much thinner fat, but also different animals had different I don't want to say powers, but different attributes, that would be considered important in certain health issues.
Totally important to what you're using it for, what your end purpose is. It's fascinating. This was so cool.
Yeah, they did some amazing things, and now I'm excited. Here's the thing that's fun about getting to do it on the website is I don't have to stop and move on to the next thing. I get to just keep deep diving and finding great tools and resources. I did find some great videos about, if you're interested more, obviously you can find a lot of stuff on mummification. As in anything, when you're doing research on something, not every resource is going to have, they're going to I had one that said, oh, they distilled essential oils in the same way that we do today, and this is what they did, and da 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 da.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, I was like, oh, and so then you kind of have to, you just have to use your critical thinking head and look at the resource. So I did try to use, collegiate resources for this, and they will all be listed. I don't have any. Here's the funny thing. If you knew how many Egypt and Egyptology books anthropology and archaeology is, what I studied. If you knew how many I have at home, I have literally like a whole shelf. I have nothing with me. So I was left to finding, articles and documentation in other ways to unlock everything. But here was the beauty. I thought, well, this is kind of cool because now everybody has access to everything that that I used. So you don't have to go buy a book or something. You'll be able to find and read that same article. You might have to join a website or something to do it, but it was fun and fascinating. So I'm looking forward to next time. Next time, I think we have ancient Greece, and then we are moving into Rome. And the connection is amazing because the great, Pliny and Herodotus and everybody was very fascinated with Egyptian physicians. In fact, the greatest courts, the greatest empires, the greatest kings all had Egyptian physicians in their court, if you will, in their toolbox of people who they went to for their health issues. They were definitely considered to be the highest of the high, the highest studied, and of the best, held to the highest regard. So really, really cool. Anyway, thank you guys. Any other questions? Because I have so much more information I could share. Please ask me.
Thank you. That's awesome. I love
That was
it.
so much fun.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to stop recording. So thank you all for joining on our recording today. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you at the next one.